It was 6 in the morning when I heard the sound of metal tearing through brick. I ran outside, and there it was, Karen's daughter's Jeep, buried halfway into my front wall. She was drunk, crying, and her mom, came running out screaming like it was my fault. And when I thought it couldn't get any worse, she tried to sue me for it. But what happened next turned the whole neighborhood upside down. Before we dive in, make sure you hit like and subscribe because stories like this deserve to be heard. The police sirens were still echoing down the street when Karen came storming out of her house in her pink robe and messy hair, shouting like she owned the whole neighborhood. Her daughter, Macy, was slumped against the hood of the Jeep, mascara running down her face, trying to look like the victim. The front end of the car was jammed into my brick wall, shattered pieces of glass, broken bricks, and leaking coolant all over my driveway. I was standing there in disbelief. My hands were still shaking from how loud that crash was. I hadn't even said a word yet when Karen pointed at me and screamed, "You better not call the cops. My daughter's hurt because of your stupid wall." I blinked. "My wall?" I said, stepping closer. She drove her Jeep through it. Karen ignored me completely and rushed to her daughter, brushing glass off her shoulder. "It's okay, honey. Mommy's here. We'll fix this. He's gonna pay for this mess." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous that I didn't know how else to react. Within minutes, neighbors started coming out, phones in their hands, recording the entire thing. I could hear whispers. "That's Karen's daughter. Did she seriously hit his wall? Oh, this is gonna be bad." Then a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out with calm, professional. One of them approached me. "Sir, you the homeowner?" "Yeah," I said, pointing to the wreck. "That's my wall." She just drove straight through it. Before I could finish, Karen jumped in. "Officer, that wall is built too close to the street. She couldn't see around the corner, it's basically a trap." The officer frowned, glancing at the sidewalk and the curb. My wall was at least 5 feet back from the property line. Everything was legal. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "your daughter hit a stationary object on private property. That's not how this works." Karen's face went red. "You don't understand. She could have died. He should be the one paying for the damage. My baby's car is destroyed because of him." Macy was crying quietly, muttering something like, "Mom, please stop," but Karen wouldn't. She was too far gone. I crossed my arms. "Your daughter was speeding and possibly drunk. You're lucky she didn't hurt anyone." Karen's eyes snapped toward me like daggers. "You think you're better than everyone else in this neighborhood, don't you? You think your little wall makes you special?" I shook my head. "I think it keeps cars like hers out of my living room." That line made a few neighbors laugh quietly, and that only made Karen angrier. "Delete those videos," she screamed at the bystanders. "This is harassment. None of you have the right to record us." But nobody stopped recording. The whole thing was unfolding like a reality show. The officers ran a quick check, no injuries, but they could smell alcohol. When they asked Macy if she'd been drinking, she hesitated. Karen immediately jumped in again. "Of course not. She's just in shock." But her slurred speech told a different story. They took her aside, ran a sobriety test, and she failed, miserably. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Karen's face turned pale as the officer said, "Ma'am, your daughter's over the limit. We'll have to issue a citation." Karen's voice cracked. "You can't do this. Her father's a lawyer." The officer didn't even flinch. "Then he can read the report himself." They handed me a card for the insurance and told me to file a property damage claim. As they were leaving, Karen turned to me one last time. Her voice wasn't loud anymore, it was cold. "You'll regret this." And then she grabbed her daughter, got in another car, and drove off, leaving behind the wrecked Jeep, a broken wall, and a street full of people who just witnessed the whole thing. I stood there in silence, staring at the hole in my wall. The bricks were crushed, and dust floated in the air. The smell of gasoline lingered. That's when one of my neighbors, old Mr. Henderson, came over and said, "You know she's not gonna let this go, right?" I nodded slowly. "I know." And as I looked at the wreckage, I had no idea that this was just the beginning. Because in less than a week, I'd be getting sued for the damage she caused. It had been 5 days since the crash. The dust had settled, literally. My wall was still cracked, the Jeep had finally been towed away, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe Karen had finally realized how ridiculous she'd sounded that night. But I was wrong. On the 6th morning, I opened my mailbox, and there it was. A legal notice. I stared at it for a few seconds, thinking it had to be a mistake. But as soon as I saw the names on the envelope, Karen Matthews and Macy Matthews versus Daniel Wright, my stomach dropped. They were suing me. The letter claimed that my illegally constructed wall had caused a hazardous obstruction near the curb, resulting in Macy's loss of vehicle control. They were demanding that I pay for the damages to her Jeep. I couldn't even believe what I was reading. They're suing me for their own crash? I called my insurance company immediately. The lady on the phone tried not to laugh. "Sir, if what you're saying is true, you're not at fault at all. Do you have any evidence?" Evidence. That word hit me. I walked outside and looked at my neighbor's house, the one with the doorbell camera. Mr. Henderson. The same man who'd warned me that night. I knocked, and he opened the door with a smirk. "Let me guess. Karen's trying to play lawyer now?" I nodded. "You got it on camera?" He grinned. "Every second of it." When he showed me the footage, I couldn't stop smiling. It was crystal clear, Macy's Jeep flying down the street way over the limit, her phone glowing in her hand, and then, boom, straight into my wall. Even better, the clip caught Karen yelling afterward, "You better not call the cops." I made 3 copies of that video and sent it straight to my lawyer. A few days later, I was sitting in a small office across from a calm, older attorney named Mr. Collins. He looked over the papers, then leaned back with a smirk. "Son, you've got nothing to worry about. If anything, they just handed you an easy win." I raised an eyebrow. "So, I don't need to do anything?" He chuckled. "Oh, we'll do plenty. I'll file a counterclaim for damages. Make sure she regrets this." That's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about principle. Karen wasn't suing me because she thought she could win. She was doing it because she couldn't stand being wrong. Because her pride was worth more than her daughter's accountability. When the hearing date arrived, the courtroom was packed. Small-town gossip spreads fast. Karen walked in like she was the victim, dressed in black, holding her daughter's hand as if they were attending a funeral. Meanwhile, I sat beside Mr. Collins, calm, quiet, and honestly, a little amused. The judge entered, stern, no-nonsense type. Karen's lawyer started the show immediately. "Your Honor, my client suffered emotional and financial distress due to the defendant's unsafe wall placement. It obstructed visibility and created a danger zone near the residential turn." The judge nodded slowly. "Do you have any evidence of this claim?" Karen's lawyer glanced at a few printed photos, poorly lit, taken after the crash. Nothing showed any illegality. Then it was our turn. Mr. Collins stood, walked to the screen, and said, "Your Honor, we have clear video footage of the incident." He pressed play. The entire room went silent. The Jeep appeared, speeding, swerving slightly, and then smashing straight into the wall. You could see the phone in Macy's hand. You could hear Karen screaming after the impact, yelling at me instead of checking if anyone was hurt. When the video ended, the judge leaned forward, hands clasped. "So, the plaintiff was texting while driving?" Karen's lawyer froze. We're not certain." The judge cut him off. "It's clear enough. This case shouldn't have been filed." Karen's face turned ghost white. Her daughter started crying again, this time for real. Then came the final blow. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. And considering the clear misuse of the court's time, I'm awarding the defendant compensation for the damage to his property. Karen gasped audibly. The courtroom murmured. My lawyer just smiled and leaned toward me. Told you. When we walked out, Karen couldn't even look me in the eye. Her daughter kept her head down, ashamed. The reporters from the local news were waiting outside. They'd heard about the Karen lawsuit. Cameras flashed. Neighbors clapped. And me? I just smiled and said one sentence. Some walls are built to protect homes, others end up teaching lessons. The courtroom smelled like old wood, paper, and tension. You could almost feel the weight of every stare, every whisper, every breath. It wasn't a high-profile case, but for our small town, it might as well have been the trial of the century. Karen and her daughter sat across from me at the plaintiff's table, all dressed up like they were in a magazine ad, matching beige suits, dark glasses, fake confidence. Karen's lips were pressed so tight, you'd think she was trying to keep her anger from leaking out. Me? I just sat quietly beside my lawyer, Mr. Collins, cool, calm, and composed, like he'd been waiting his whole life to deal with someone like her. The bailiff called for order, and the judge, a tall man with a face that looked carved from stone, took his seat. Let's begin, he said, voice deep and sharp. Karen's lawyer stood first. His tone was dramatic, his pacing rehearsed. Your Honor, this case isn't about blame, it's about responsibility. My client's daughter suffered a traumatic accident because the defendant chose to build a wall far too close to the street, without regard for safety or city code. He pointed toward me, the reckless wall builder, as if I were some sort of villain. Karen nodded along, holding her daughter's hand like she was comforting a war victim. The judge adjusted his glasses. Do you have proof of this alleged code violation? Karen's lawyer cleared his throat, flipping through his folder. We, believe. The judge cut him off. Belief isn't proof, counselor. The room chuckled softly. Karen shot them a death glare. Then the lawyer pulled out a few printed photos, blurry, poorly framed shots of the wall from random angles. As you can see, Your Honor. The judge squinted. I see a wall. A perfectly normal wall. Karen's face flushed red. She whispered something angrily to her lawyer, but the judge raised a hand. Mrs. Matthews, please remain silent. That was the first crack in their performance, and I couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face. Then it was our turn. Mr. Collins stood up slowly, like a man who already knew he'd won. Your Honor, he said calmly, we appreciate the plaintiff's creativity, but we deal in facts, not fantasies. He walked to the projector, connected his laptop, and played the video from Mr. Henderson's doorbell camera. The moment that footage hit the screen, silence. You could see the Jeep, the headlights flickering, speeding down the residential street way over the limit. Then, a faint glow from Macy's phone, lighting up her face. And then, impact. The sound of metal and brick colliding filled the courtroom speakers. Karen's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved it off. Let it play. The footage ended with Karen running toward the wreckage, screaming, not in concern, but rage. You better not call the cops. My daughter's hurt because of your stupid wall. The judge leaned back, crossed his arms, and stared at Karen for a long, uncomfortable moment. Mrs. Matthews, is that your voice in the video? She hesitated, then whispered, yes. And your daughter was driving at the time? Yes, she muttered again, almost inaudibly. The judge nodded slowly. And, according to the officer's report, she was found intoxicated? Karen's lawyer jumped up. Objection. That report hasn't been submitted as evidence. Mr. Collins smirked and held up a folder. It has now, Your Honor. The judge reviewed it, eyes narrowing slightly. Then he closed the file, exhaled deeply, and said the words I'd been waiting for. This case should have never reached my courtroom. He looked directly at Karen. Mrs. Matthews, your daughter was driving drunk, distracted, and at an unlawful speed. You have the audacity to sue a homeowner whose property she destroyed? The defendant's wall wasn't a hazard, your negligence was. Karen's jaw dropped. Her daughter started sobbing quietly. The judge continued, voice like a hammer. Case dismissed, with prejudice. And considering the clear misuse of the court's time and resources, I'm granting the defendant's counterclaim for property damage and legal fees. Bang! The gavel struck. The room erupted, whispers, gasps, even a few claps from the back row. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. Her lawyer leaned in, trying to calm her, but she yanked her arm away, muttering, "This isn't over." The judge turned sharply. "Oh, it's over." Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt different, warmer, cleaner. A few neighbors who'd shown up to watch patted me on the back. One of them laughed and said, "Man, I've lived here 30 years, never seen a Karen lose that bad." I smiled. Guess there's a first time for everything. My lawyer shook my hand and said, "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just shows up on time." As we walked away, I glanced across the parking lot. Karen was there, standing beside her daughter, red-faced, trembling, and for once, silent. And in that moment, I realized, some people don't learn their lesson until the world stops letting them talk. For the first time in weeks, my house felt peaceful again. No shouting. No flashing police lights. No cracked walls or court dates, just silence. I stood in my driveway, staring at the newly rebuilt brick wall. The mason had done a perfect job, straight, sturdy, even better than before. Every time I looked at it, I smiled. Not because of the wall itself, but because of what it stood for now, proof that sometimes, the truth really does win. Karen hadn't said a word to me since the verdict. Not a text. Not a letter. Not even a passive-aggressive glare across the street, and that, honestly, was worth more than any court settlement. But her silence wasn't peace, it was defeat. I heard from a few neighbors that her daughter, Macy, had lost her license for 2 years. She had to attend mandatory DUI classes and community service. The same girl who used to speed down the street in her Jeep was now cleaning trash off the side of the highway. Poetic, if you ask me. And as for Karen, well, let's just say her perfect neighborhood reputation didn't survive the fallout. Word spreads fast in a small community. Everyone knew she tried to sue me. Everyone had seen the footage. Now, when she walked her dog in the morning, people turned their backs or whispered as she passed. She'd built her entire life on being the loudest, most controlling person on the block, but now, nobody cared what she had to say. About a week after the verdict, I got a letter from my lawyer. Inside was a check, reimbursement for the damage to my property, court costs, and even a little extra for emotional distress. Mr. Collins had written a note at the bottom. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. It's just fair. Enjoy the peace. I couldn't help but smile. I walked outside, coffee in hand, and leaned against the new wall. The morning sun was warm, birds were chirping again, like life had finally returned to normal. Then, as if on cue, I saw Karen stepping out of her front door. She froze when she noticed me. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the street, no words, no gestures, just quiet tension. And then she looked away first. That's when I realized something important. I didn't hate her. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt done. Done being blamed, done being attacked, done letting people like her twist the truth. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting back. It's winning quietly. A few days later, one of my neighbors, the same old man with the doorbell camera, walked over, hands in his pockets. "Wall looks good," he said. "Bet it feels nice knowing it's all over." I nodded. "Yeah. Feels even better knowing she had to pay for it." He laughed. "You know, I think the whole neighborhood learned something from this." I smiled back. "Yeah. Don't mess with walls that are built right." We both laughed, and he went on his way. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping tea, thinking about everything that had happened, the crash, the shouting, the lawsuit, the courtroom. It felt like something out of a movie. But it was real, every second of it. And if there was one thing I took from all of it, it was this. Some people crash into your life expecting you to crumble. But if you stand your ground, you become the wall that teaches them a lesson. I looked at that wall one last time before heading inside, strong, clean, unmoving. The same could finally be said about me. Karen's daughter crashed her Jeep into my wall. They tried to sue me, but in the end, they lost everything, and I gained something better, peace.